What up? It's your boy King Down 225 coming at you with another reactionary video. So hit that like, subscribe, become part of the kingdom. Never did a crash course reactionary video, but I be fucking with this page tough because they get real like insights on the black experience and history and shit. And they gonna talk about the war on drugs. Crash course Black History number 42. Man, I talked about I experienced it. I was born in '79. Grew up in the '80s, cut my teeth in the '90s. So this directly affected me and generations after me. So when black people try to, you know, air out their grievances with the shit that they done been through, I gotta say it many a times, they roll their eyes and like slavery was a long time ago. Get over it. What about the '80s? And how that affected my community. We can hop through eras in time, the '60s, the '70s. Like it just wasn't slavery. It's a lot of shit that y'all did, and this is one of the most heinous things that they did. And we're gonna get to it. It's a 13-minute video, so buckle up. Man, come on, start. Don't freeze up.
I'm Clint Smith, and this is Crash Course Black American History. You know, every nation's government has to create policies. Policies or plans that detail what the government wants to achieve.
Hmm.
Some of those policies have good outcomes, and sometimes not so good. Today, we're going to talk about the war on drugs, a policy initiative that has gone on for years. It was designed ostensibly to stop drug use and drug dealing across the United States. But what ended up happening is that it entangled millions of black people in the criminal legal system for generations. For some people, this was an adverse consequence of a well-intentioned policy. But for others, this is exactly what they wanted the policy to do. Don't believe me? Well, you might soon. Let's start the show.
Oh, yeah.
The official war on drugs started in Richard.
If you ain't following this page, you need to go follow it. He do a tremendous job explaining a lot of the shit from Tuskegee experience, a lot of atrocities that black people had to endure. Not just the negative shit, but a lot of, figures in black history that you don't really be taught about. Eras in black history. It's very informative.
Nixon's presidency in the early 1970s, and according to many activists, continues on to this day. Though officially, it hasn't been as much of a national obsession since the end of Bill Clinton's presidency. It was an initiative promoted by the federal government and multiple presidents of both political parties that aimed to stop the use, distribution, and trade of illegal drugs. But the thing is,
I'm doing this to remind black people of our history. Like, remember this shit. This wasn't 400 years ago. This was like, fuck it, we looking at our history. This was last week. This happened.
a big part of how this was implemented was by stricter, more severe prison sentences in an effort to deter drug dealers and users. But the outcomes of the war on drugs shows that even if you don't explicitly mention race in a policy, you may still be making a policy about race. Sometimes that's intentional, and sometimes it's not. In order to understand the war on drugs, we have to talk about the origins of the criminalization of black communities. As we've discussed, this has been consistent throughout American history. But debates on how to address drug use in society began to affect black communities more directly in the 1960s. Even though President Lyndon B. Johnson is best known for his Great Society legislation and passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, He also declared what was called a war on crime in March of 1965. The war on crime was not exactly the same as the war on drugs, but it put in place many of the same powers that would eventually make the war on drugs as expansive and devastating as it was. The war on crime produced the Law Enforcement Assistance Act, which in 1965 authorized the federal government to take a direct role in militarizing local police. Then, the Safe Streets Act of 1968 invested $400 million in the war on crime and created the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration to oversee the funding. Most of it went.
Does that sound familiar to black people in 2022? Let's continue.
The Safe Streets Act of 1968 invested $400 million in the war on crime and created the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration to oversee the funding. Most of it went to supervise and surveil low-income urban communities, even though those communities weren't the only places that crime and drugs could be found. But low-income urban communities are where black people often lived. These policies.
I wonder if that's a coincidence.
And research, like the Moynihan Report, a report on the poverty in black communities, served to develop and spread stereotypes about black urban poverty. They said that the tangle of poverty and drug use was largely the result of individual and cultural flaws. The Moynihan Report said that, quote, at the heart of the deterioration of the fabric of Negro society is the deterioration of the Negro family. It is the fundamental source of the weakness of the Negro community at the present time. Moynihan.
I would somewhat agree with that. I would. But it's all context. What led to the deterioration of the black family? Gotta go deeper.
Acknowledged racism still played a role, but seemed to think that the real issue was the structure of black families, which, given all the structural impediments black people were facing.
You know what this is? It's called redlining. It's another thing that they don't like to talk about. How they chop and control large number of population. What redline is, okay, I own the mortgage company, I'm the bank, I'm not gonna give you or sell your home in these areas. I'm only gonna sell you homes in these areas. If the black person, see, it's a wicked scheme in a game, and y'all like, oh, slavery was so long ago. Get away, get over it. Well, okay, let's not talk about slavery. Let's talk about all this other shit you did. Redlining, huh? You don't want to talk about that? How you fucking basically trapped us exactly where you wanted us to be. Then like, oh man, but you're poor. You need to get a, okay, but you keep trapping us in poor communities. You know what? Let this man continue, cause he gonna explain it better.
Just seems off base. All of this helped lead to the end of the previous war on poverty and shape the rationale, legislation, and policies for the war on crime. Grassroots organizations like the Black Panther Party caught on to what was going on pretty quickly and organized to protect black communities from the police violence that followed from being over-policed. Black Americans were brutally beaten and harassed by law enforcement, and many of them lost their.
What's so different about 2022? This is historical facts. The police forces, slave catchers, getting your ass beat up as a black person in, getting your ass police brutalized now. What is the deviation?
Their lives. They also realized the importance of political organizing and cultural power during these times. So they created breakfast programs and community schools in an attempt to provide the resources for themselves that they felt the government wasn't providing them. The war on drugs formally began during the Nixon presidency. He was the first person to use the term war on drugs and stated that drug abuse.
Remember, this the president Watergate who got caught recording his opponent, right? So, you know he ain't got no scruples. Let's continue.
Was, quote, public enemy number one. President Nixon increased federal funding for drug control agencies, and in 1973, he established the Drug Enforcement Administration, or the DEA, a special police force targeting illicit drug use and drug smuggling. The Nixon administration also categorized marijuana as a Schedule I drug, which is the most restrictive drug category in the United States, meaning punishments for being found with that drug would be severe. During Jimmy Carter's presidency, there were some efforts to make drug policy slightly less punitive. Between 1973 and 1977, 11 states did decriminalize marijuana possession. But the war on drugs was far from over. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan brought back many of the drug...
Every time I see this nigga, he make my stomach hurt. They say, oh, drug dealers in the hood say, oh, this is the world's greatest president. But the community understand who this son sucker is. Him and his fucking wife.
Possession and distribution policies of the Nixon administration. The First Lady, Nancy Reagan, even started her famous Just Say No campaign.
Just say no. I remember you, bitch. But I just want you to take a picture of this. Take a view of this picture. Right? Even then, they wasn't really talking to the black kids. It's got one black kid, or maybe 3 people of color in the whole goddamn in the whole photo. Rest of them little white kids. That's who they wanted to say no to drugs to. They wanted to arrest and throw away the key, the little black kids. With no sympathy for little black kids. And let's put the proper context in it. Fathers were disappearing in the late 60s when they come back from war, hooked on drugs, disappearing. Let's not talk about. They ain't talking about the COINTELPRO, not COINTELPRO, the Iran-Contra scandal led to them putting drugs in the black community to fund the fucking war against Cuba. I don't want to talk about that. It's like, okay, say no to drugs, but I'm going to give you the drugs to take and sell, and then I'm going to lock your ass up and throw away the key if I catch you with my police force using those same drugs I just gave you. Where your daddy? Why you so poor? Why you so broke? What's the problem with y'all black folks? Like, bitch, you just gave me some drugs and my people got hooked. He talk about the crime rate. Well, you shouldn't have took him. You shouldn't have locked his ass up. Let's continue.
Which was intended to address the dangers of drug use. The Reagan administration also pushed for smaller government more broadly, arguing that the expansion of social resources like welfare programs and increased funding for community programming contributed to a sense of over-reliance and exacerbated perceived social failings. During Reagan's administration is when we see some of the most severe policies related to drug use in U.S. history. They passed harsh penalties at the federal level and encouraged state legislators to implement these harsh penalties as well. This led to a massive increase of incarceration for nonviolent drug crimes. And these policies disproportionately impacted Black and Latino communities. And many argue that the Reagan administration did actually intend to make some of these policies about race. I mean, they created the welfare queen stereotype, a harmful caricature of a Black woman who used welfare checks and child rearing to take money from the government.
Oh, y'all remember that shit. Welfare queens. They had another term called crack babies. All you kids gonna be, they spread fear and misinformation throughout the whole Black community. Oh, these people just taking advantage of the... Okay, again, y'all put the drugs in our community. Y'all trapped us in poverty. Y'all won't let us free by letting us buy neighborhoods. You fucking got control of the union, so you tell me if I can get a job or not. Oh, your name Boom Shikwa? I'm denying your application. And you wonder why. Okay, I'm going to let him finish. But do you know who this Ronald Reagan sap sucker fucker reminds me of in 2022? You guessed it. Donald fucking Trump. Let's look at their history. Ronald Reagan was a fucking actor, a reality star basically in his time, who became president of the United States of harsh Republican ideals. A rising tide lifts all boats. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. Trickle down economics. Now you started the crack era. You empowered a lot of crack dealers. I'm just not gonna say, bro. It's just like the cycle that they threw us in was so fucked up. Okay, I'm gonna give you the dope. I'm gonna give you the crack. I'm gonna make your community addicted. Then I'm gonna make sure, cause you know some of my people do drugs too. They do coke though. So I'm gonna make sure the drugs that you got get you more time than the drugs that we got. We're gonna arrest you, and then we're gonna turn your mamas and your sisters against you because we're gonna another term they use, super predators. We're gonna say, oh y'all incorrigible, you ain't got no daddy, you can't tell them what to do, just lock them all up. He gonna get into that. Let's continue.
Never actually saying that the welfare queen was black, Reagan relied on pretty racist language to promote this idea and used similar language while promoting the war on drugs. In 1986, Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which also had very harmful implications for black and brown communities. It created longer prison sentences.
I want y'all to go back
and used similar language.
I want you to see something.
In 1986,
this right here, you see this black man? I know he was very popular. I'm not gonna say nothing negative on him, but at this moment, this is probably when my generation start getting like separation from the generation before us, because like I feel as though the elders abandoned us, threw us to the wolves. Like you are clapping for the future imprisonment and destruction of your own communities and think that you are doing something for us. Like I was one of those in '86. I was 7 years old in the middle. I'm like, yeah, I niggas breaking in my house and stealing from us and shit. I see the fiends out here, but I always was aware of like, damn, bro, what the fuck, man? You think throwing a nigga in jail gonna stop this shit? You ain't gonna do nothing but turn a person who need help into an animal. Cause now you got him in the system. And you gotta be an animal to survive that shit. Let's continue.
Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which also had very harmful implications for black and brown communities.
Now, another thing, Anti-Drug Abuse Act, putting people in jail for using the drugs, right? Imagine if they would have policies in place like that in 2022 for the opioid epidemic. Like any person I see with some fucking opioids, I'm throwing in jail for a minimum of 5 years. Man, come on, you know they would do that shit. See, now it was like they criminals during crack era, and they addicts and victims during opioid epidemic. Wonder why? Let's continue.
Created longer prison sentences for individuals who use crack cocaine, which was typically used by black Americans, and shorter prison sentences for those who use powder cocaine, which was typically used by white Americans. For example, if a person had 5 grams of crack, it would trigger an automatic 5-year sentence. But a person had to have 500 grams of powder cocaine to trigger the same sentence. So these war on drug policies had a disproportionate impact on communities of color. Because it wasn't just black people using drugs. A lot of people were using drugs. People of all races and all backgrounds. But the presidential administrations in the United States disproportionately targeted and penalized black and brown Americans for drug use, and penalizing them more severely than they did their white counterparts. To be clear, crack cocaine had a devastating impact on the black community.
Very.
It created addictions, deaths,
and
drug-related crimes,
all of that,
hamstringing many vibrant communities of color.
Damn.
But it is important to address why this was happening. There were huge structural changes happening within cities. This led to white flight, deindustrialization, loss of employment, rise of low-paying service jobs, and general urban blight. Many black middle-class families.
Black middle class fled too, but the white flight. Remember that part where I talk about the redlining and how you trapped in certain communities because the people who over the mortgages in the bank can, approve and deny whatever the fuck they want, or we'll let them buy over there, but they can't buy over here. You ain't got to say that out loud, but that's how it is. It's like an unwritten rule. Okay, they can get that over there, but they can't go nowhere that's gonna prove they like. So you gotta stay over there with the bad schools, the bad this, the bad that. Okay, let's continue.
Also left the cities for the suburbs as well. The loss of jobs and services in the inner cities led to the growth of alternative economies. It also led to crime and social dislocation. And it was the combination of all of these social, economic, and political forces that contributed to the devastation of drugs on the black urban community. It wasn't just individual failings. It wasn't culture. During the Clinton administration, the Violent Crime Control Act allowed for over $9 billion.
Those fucking Clintons. Crime bill, crime bill, crime bill. That's all I gotta say. Crime bill. And how much they spend policing us, watching us, imprisoning us, instead of really helping us. Like, just imagine how that money would have been used if you'd improved a couple of schools with that $9 billion at that time, instead of building new prisons for fucking non-violent drug offenses that today you would look at them as addicts.
Urban community. It wasn't just individual failings. It wasn't culture. During the Clinton administration, the Violent Crime Control Act allowed for over $9 billion to be allotted for prison construction in the U.S. and $8 billion for 100,000 police officers. There was also an expansion of the federal death penalty, mandatory minimum sentencing, and truth in sentencing incentives to encourage states to advocate for harsher punishments without parole. This is also when the three strikes provision was promoted in the United States. This meant that a defendant might get a life sentence for almost any crime, no matter how minor, if they had 2 prior convictions that were considered a violent offense. All of these policies created a huge increase in incarceration for nonviolent drug offenses, going from 50,000 in 1980 to 400,000 in 1997. A disproportionate amount of these incarcerated folks were black Americans. And after all this,
between that time, 1980, I was a year old. In 1997, I was 18. So in that period of time, I literally grew up during the mass incarceration periods of black men. Grew up during the crack era. I seen the effects. I am not like, a lot of days I was mad as a child. But I always understood, like, man, this dude is an addict. Like, it's not helping me to put my daddy in jail for 5 years. Help get my daddy off the drugs so he can be home with us. Now I'm in this bitch with my mama all bitter and shit by herself. Not my mama. She up in this bitch telling me, oh, you the man of the house now. Like, come on, bro. We living in a fucking poverty-stricken neighborhood. What the fuck else I'm gonna do to make money? Alternative economy. What? I just never understood why people don't get it, bro. Yeah, I'm the type of nigga like, people don't have to help you. Get it on your own. Grind. Work hard. Do this. But stop getting in my fucking way. Like, stop implementing these rules. Thank you, help me. Stop having these motherfucking police shaking me down. Like, let me grind. Let me work hard.
This provision was promoted in the United States. This meant that a defendant might get a life sentence for almost any crime, no matter how minor, if they had 2 prior convictions that were considered a violent offense. All of these policies created a huge increase in incarceration for nonviolent drug offenses, going from 50,000 in 1980 to 400,000 in 1997. A disproportionate amount of these incarcerated folks were Black Americans. And after all this, the war on drugs didn't even decrease drug use.
You heard?
Some people pushed back against the criticism of the war on drugs and the subsequent consequences of mass incarceration by saying that Black Americans supported it. But that sort of take is rude.
Before he say what he say, let me say what I got to say about Black mothers supporting that Black people. Because like I say, Raccoon, where the fuck his name was in that picture with Ronald Reagan. Okay? This is when I say that our mothers turned on us because they didn't understand that daddy ain't around. Maybe little motherfuckers need to seek therapists instead of jail time. Like they believed the lie that you couldn't trust your children anymore. They were super predators. They're criminals. Spent the most of my childhood like, oh my God, the news keep telling me y'all ain't gonna live to see 18. I'm like, but goddamn, mama, who the fuck gonna tell you more about? I said that not then, cause you know I was a respected kid. Who the fuck gonna tell you more about your children than you should know? Don't believe like a lot of these dudes just lost boys found a way, guided the wrong. Like I said, a lot of single mothers, women don't never wanted to take the responsibility. Yeah, daddies was gone, but any woman who tell a young man he the man of the house, I don't expect nothing less than you creating a drug dealer. I'm point blank. Period. If you in certain areas, he say you the man of the house. The fuck the list 16, 17-year-old dude supposed to do? Go get a job at McDonald's? What? No. So yes, our parents. That was the divide. The church group was 60. Our parents went there to Bill Clinton in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, begging for help. Help me, white man, with my own children. Help me. You run into the same motherfucker who put the drugs in the community to destroy your shit. And the help that you beg for, you're like, well, we was asking for other shit too. But they didn't really highlight that. Yeah, because they wanted, the part that they really was focused on was the locking you niggas up. Women still don't get this. If the Black men are gone, you at the mercy of the world. Like they still don't, like man, that's when I really turned red pill for red pill. I'm talking about I'm young. I'm like, I'm hearing all this shit. I know what Black mothers and told sons in the 80s. I know this. I done seen this. I done seen little niggas take penitentiary chances because his mama got 8, 9 kids and them bitches hungry and broke up now. So he gotta step up, be the man of the house. And now y'all motherfuckers done flipped it around and let these white folks convince your sons are super predators. They incorrigible. They need to be criminalized and thrown in jail. Couldn't make this shit up, bro. To this day, I am kind of like, there's a lot of old Black female senators, Black males too, that really can't tell me shit. They really can't tell me shit. Like, yeah, y'all served y'all time, y'all did y'all purpose, and y'all, but like, move on. Why don't you? I ain't gonna say no names because I ain't gonna be disrespectful, but I remember how I felt. I remember how they looked at us. I remember how they treated us. All us not criminals. You let them people believe that we criminals? Your son went to church with you. Your son carry your groceries. Your son still open the door for you, say yes ma'am and no ma'am. Stop putting that pressure on that little boy to go out there and make grown up man moves. And realize why you in this situation. Let's continue.
Rooted in kind of misremembering the past. As the scholars Elizabeth Hinton, Jalili Kohler-Hausman, and Veshla M. Weaver have written, Calls for tough sentencing and police protection were paired with calls for full employment, quality education, and drug treatment, and criticism of police brutality. It's not just that those demands were ignored completely, it's that some elements were elevated and others were diminished. When blacks ask for better policing, legislators tend to hear more instead. Most experts today agree that the war on drugs was a failure. It didn't decrease the number of drugs used in many communities, and it actually had some pretty awful consequences. It was a catalyst that produced the carceral state, a term that, in part, describes the billions of dollars the U.S. government filters into the criminal justice system, which disproportionately affects people of color. That money goes to the budgets of police, sheriffs, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and even prison staff. Here are some of the stats of what the war on drugs actually did. One FBI study noted that while blacks represented only 12% of all illegal drug users, they made up 41% of those arrested on cocaine and heroin charges.
How could y'all explain that? How could y'all explain that figure if it ain't some systematic shit? Intentional. We're 12, 13% of the population. Only have 12% of illegal drug use. But 41% of arrests. Wow. I mean, Rockefeller laws. But then when we say shit like this, y'all just complain. That's old. Leave that law and stop it. Slavery a long time ago. Like, why do we even try? Some people never gonna get it. Let's continue.
And heroin charges. Women, disproportionately black women, are the fastest growing incarcerated population in the United States. Since 1970, America's incarcerated population has increased by 500%, resulting in over 2 million people in jail and prison today. And despite being only 5% of the global population, the U.S. contains roughly 20% of the world's prison population. According to studies, today, black and white people use and sell illicit drugs at similar rates, but black people are roughly 2.6 times more likely to get arrested for drug crimes. And I've seen this firsthand. I taught in prisons where young men have been locked up for doing the same things that some of my white college classmates did. The difference is that one group was targeted and another group wasn't. And oftentimes, that's what decides who ends up in a prison and who ends up free. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.
Like I said, bro, it's a friendly reminder of y'all history. I'm a very big history buff. That was always my favorite subject in school. I always felt like it was a fucking playbook on the behavior, human patterns and behavior. Like this we did then, this what we capable of doing now. And y'all like the only thing they like to hold up is slavery. Hey, when we talk about police brutality, they like, what about Chicago? We can talk about Chicago, but do we really want to talk about Chicago? No, you don't. You don't. I always felt like my generation has started the recovery on fathers being present in their children's lives, despite what you think or what the media try to portray. Like my daddy was gone, drugs and whatnot. People around me were on drugs, sold them, took them, break-ins, all that you can think of that happened. Yeah, I was there. I was there. But I also understand the biggest issue, the why that shit ran rampant, cause daddies wasn't around. They were on the drugs. They were either selling them, getting locked up. But who put the drug there? Nobody really get in trouble for that shit. But we continuously get in trouble for fucking doing it. But that was then. This is now. They got a new epidemic. Sort of the same, but not the same. It's the opioid epidemic. That's all about treatment and, you know, mental health and, oh, suck my dick. You locked my uncles and daddies up. You locked my homeboys. You told us we wasn't shit. He told us we wasn't nothing but a bunch of fucking criminals. I'm a grown ass man who helped raise fucking numerous amount of children and grandkids. I have mattered. If I had listened to y'all motherfuckers in the 80s and the 90s, you wanted me dead. That was the whole fucking point. Wanted me out of here, my black body out of here. Oh, they ain't gonna live this. This shit was on the news. Statistics say that most black teens won't live to see the age 18. That shit had my mama spooked. Spooked. I'm like, yeah, I know niggas that do that and do this and do that. But most of the time, like, niggas doing that because they tired of being poor. That's my opinion and my observation, my experience on the drug and the crack era and what the responsibilities lie. When anybody say, like, when we have our grievances and everybody say we tired of y'all talking about slavery, bring this up. This is in the 80s. This is in the 90s. Fuck that. Fuck what you talking about slavery. Okay, let's talk about what y'all did us this recent. I'm alive. I ain't no goddamn octogenarian. I ain't 80s. I'm 40. 43 to be exact. 4 decades ago this was happening. Not a million years ago. Hit that like and subscribe, become part of it. Remember this shit. Remember y'all history, black folk. I'm not trying to say hold grudges. Get over this shit. But always be aware, bro. Stop letting these people convince you that you don't have a fucking grievance in this country. Multiple grievances. Stop letting motherfuckers tell you, oh, just get over it. Like, you turn, in the time you say that shit, I can't really fuck with you. I'm sorry. I can't. I'll be cordial to anybody, but like, we not gonna be friends. We not gonna be cool. Sorry. Fuck you. Hit that like, subscribe, become part of the kingdom.